Canada should overhaul its tax regime to keep it competitive with the U.S., according to a new Senate report. Now that NAFTA negotiations have wrapped, attention is turning to the fall economic update expected in the coming weeks. Does Canada need to cut corporate taxes or do something else to stay competitive with its southern neighbour? What other moves could the government make to quell private sector concerns? Joining me now in Vancouver, Peter Julian is the NDP's finance critic. In Toronto, Marco Mendicino is the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Infrastructure. And here with me in Ottawa, Conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre. Hi to all three of you. Thank you so much for making time for us on a Friday evening. Mr. Mendicino, I'll start with you. As I mentioned, we're expecting the fall economic update in the next few weeks. What is the government going to do to quell business concerns that we are not competitive with the U.S. right now?
Well, let me just first begin by congratulating my colleague Pierre on the arrival of his daughter. Pierre, you'll never sleep the same again, so make sure to stock up on some coffee. But just to answer,
thank you.
Just to answer your question, Vashi, some of the recommendations which have come forward in the Senate, this government has already acted on. And that's led to growth, like Minister Champagne said. So,
but I'm asking what's going to happen in the fall economic update. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
Well, I don't want to preempt the minister, but I do want to be responsive to the Minister of Finance. But I do want to be responsive to your question. We've seen record jobs growth in this country over the last 3 years. Over 600,000 jobs created, record low unemployment. We have the best growth in the G7, and that is on the basis of a low tax regime. The first thing that we did when we took the reins of power was we cut taxes for 9 million Canadians, Vashi. We also lowered the small business tax rate to the lowest rate in the G7. That's an important indication to small business and medium-sized enterprises that we're going to support them as we seek to remain very competitive. And what are we seeing? We're seeing investment from the likes of Amazon, Vail, Salesforce, and most recently Shell in a consortium, which is going to build the largest private sector investment, $40 billion worth in a pipeline out west. And we've got a good trade regime with all of our major partners, whether it's here in North America, in Europe, abroad, in South Asia, in the Pacific. All of these things together, the confluence of these variables are making sure that Canada remains very competitive.
So are we to infer from that there is no changes coming in the fall economic update, that the perception of the government is that nothing needs to be done to amend our system in order to respond to the cuts that we've seen, the tax regime cuts that we've seen in the U.S.?
Well, look, the Minister of Finance is always open to new ideas, and he remains very consultative with the private sector. This will be part of his pre-budget consultation, and I know that he's always looking for ways to ensure that Canada continues to be competitive, but on every single major metric out there, whether it's on jobs, whether it's on unemployment, whether it's on trade and commerce, we are doing exceedingly well, certainly as it relates to the G7, and that's put Canada in a very good position.
Mr. Poilievre, does Mr. Mendicino have a point that the economy is firing on all cylinders and so we don't need to do this?
Well, let me congratulate him first for his kind words at the outset, but I don't think he does have a point on those statistics that he provided. Let me offer the real data with respect to Canada's economy. First of all, there's been almost no job creation in Canada this calendar year. The job creation south of the border has been 4 times the rate on a per capita basis as here north of the border. We're losing money to the Americans, and that's Donald Trump's goal, right? He said he wants our money and our jobs, and he's taking both right now. A Canadian investment in the U.S. last year was $60 billion, up 2/3. American investment in Canada during the same period was $10 billion, down by half. In other words, for every $6 of Canadian investment in the U.S., we're only getting $1 of American investment back in Canada. Our money is heading south and it's not coming back. And the results have been very real. Look at the U.S. stock exchange has risen 11% more annually over the last 2 years than here in Canada, which not only hurts our pensioners who have savings in the stock market, but also our businesses who rely on it for a source of investment. And if you don't believe those numbers, well, ask Bill Morneau's old think tank, CD Howe, which says that American companies are investing $23,000 per worker, while Canadian companies are only investing $13,000 per worker.
So what specifically would you like to see the government
The first
do?
thing is to reverse the carbon tax that the government is planning to impose on Canadian business next year. Second is to reverse some of the damaging tax increases that this government has imposed on our small businesses. They're punishing small and medium-sized enterprises, those that share earnings and work with family members, those that try to save for their future within their corporate entity are facing massive new tax increases.
Do you want to see the corporate tax rate cut?
We're not jumping to that conclusion yet. We're carefully analyzing all of the various options. The first thing is to stop the damaging policies that the government has already instituted. In addition to the tax increases that I just mentioned, the Prime Minister blocked a pipeline to the Pacific Northern Gateway, and his policies effectively blocked another one to the Atlantic Energy East, which had the effect of not only allowing Donald Trump and the Americans to take our oil at a $50 a barrel discount, but also those same companies then started to invest in America.
I don't think that's the sole reason for the differential, just not getting one pipeline built. There are other components to why the differential is as big as it is right now.
First of all, it's not one pipeline, it's three. When Justin Trudeau took office, he had three of the world's biggest and most respected pipeline companies, Kinder Morgan, TransCanada, and Enbridge, ready with shovels to go into the ground, with applications in and capital set aside to build those pipelines. All three of those companies have now left for the United States. So not only they're getting our cheap oil, they're getting billions of dollars of investment, including Canadian tax dollars. The money that Trudeau gave Kinder Morgan was immediately deployed into a natural gas pipeline project in Texas. So your tax dollars are building Texas pipelines.
Okay, I want to bring Mr. Julian into the conversation. Do you think that that Canada has a competitiveness problem?
Yes, I do. I do believe we do have this problem, and I've just come back from a 10-city tour with the Finance Committee, and it's been great hearing from Canadians about what they see the problems as being. The problems are a lack of access to education and training, so we have the trained workers of tomorrow, a lack of investment into research and development. We trail the rest of the industrialized world in those types of investments, even problems with housing, because the federal government has been very slow to react to a housing crisis. There are many businesses that are finding it difficult to keep workers in their area because there's simply no affordable housing. These are the kinds of issues that I think the government has to tackle and has chosen not to date. It's not a simple issue of more tax handouts. It's actually having a strategy in place for us to respond in a smart way that both impacts positively on our quality of life, but also helps our businesses. One of the things that I thought was most remarkable from these hearings, we went to 10 different cities, was a number of people who mentioned that our universal healthcare system is a major competitive advantage. The figure most often cited is per employee, per year, it's a $3,000 competitive advantage for Canadian businesses. American businesses have to pay for healthcare plans for their employees. Canadian businesses have universal Medicare. And when we look at universal pharmacare, it would be a competitive advantage that would help our businesses up to $6 billion, according to the parliamentary budgetary officers. So this idea of just cutting more corporate taxes is not the way to go. It's making the investments so we actually have the economy of tomorrow.
Okay, I have 2 minutes left for this segment, and I have to go to commercial, but I want to get each of you back one more time. So I'll start with Mr. Mendocino, because your colleagues are saying a lot of things about what you're not doing, so I'll give you a chance to respond.
Well, in response to Mr. Julian's comments about our need to address housing, I would simply point out that for the first time in a very long while, the federal government is seriously back at the table with the introduction of the National Housing Strategy. That's going to infuse $40 billion. It's going to help.
Much of that money a long time from now, though.
Well, no, but I mean, it's important. First, there's phase one spending that has gone into a state of good repair, and we're going to see additional stock infused into markets like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and other cities that have big backlogs. And with regards to Pierre, I got to tell you, when you asked him about whether or not the Conservative Party of Canada would consider lowering the small business tax rate, he hesitated. That's the first time I think I've ever heard a Conservative sort of choke on whether or not small business taxes should go lower. Do you want to know why, Vashi? That's because we've got the lowest rate in the G7. And in addition to that, the middle class tax cut that we gave is putting it over approximately $2,000 of extra disposable income in a typical average family of four by next year. I mean, these are all good things which are going to drive the economy.
I have to move on to Mr. Poilievre and let him respond to that.
Well, of course, we support lowering small business tax rates. That wasn't the question I was answering at the time.
Corporate tax rate.
She was asking about the general corporate tax rate. The conservatives.
That's what the business community has been advocating.
And you still have
and you didn't answer it either. You're the one that's in government having to make the decision. So I'll look forward to hearing your answer on that eventually. But the previous government introduced small business tax cuts down to 9%. This government raised it up, and then under pressure from the opposition, then relented on that point. But here's the reality. Trudeau blocked 2 pipelines, 2.5 if you include Trans Mountain, which is not even under construction. And that is sending money south of the border. He's increased taxes on businesses and families, which has also discouraged investment and increased the flow of money to the United States of America. And this is all before the carbon tax takes effect and the massive new increases in payroll taxes occur. All of these things are driving money out of our country and into the hands of Donald Trump and the Americans. When Conservatives take office, we're going to reverse this approach. We're going to replace it with a low-tax, light regulation approach, which will bring our money, our jobs, and our investment back to Canada.
Final word to you, Mr. Julian.
Well, first off, when the Conservatives were in power, they put in place this, what we've seen, the complete deterioration of our value added. We export raw bitumen, raw logs, raw minerals, and the Conservatives are part of that. That's exporting jobs out of our country. That came out of the hearings as well. And the business community and others, I thought, were very eloquent when they talked about the unfairness of our existing tax system. We don't have any taxes for the web giants. Facebook and Google basically can take money out of Canada and compete with Canadian businesses on an unfair way. And we don't do anything about offshore tax havens as well. These are issues that not only regular Canadians, but the business community are talking about, and they need to be addressed. The government simply can't get by anymore by saying things are fine. And final point. Canadian families are struggling under a record debt load. So for the Liberals to say everything is okay is simply wrong.
Okay, I've got to leave it there, but thank you so much to all 3 of you. Thanks to Marco Mendicino, Pierre Poilievre, and Peter Julian. Really appreciate your time.